Good morning. Welcome to Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship. I'm Reverend Paul Beckel.
And I'm Carrie Kenline. Thank you for being with us today. If you're new, we'd be grateful to have you provide us with contact information so we can let you know what's going on here at Buff, which is what we call the Bellingham Unitarian Fellowship. There are buff-colored visitor contact cards in the pew racks and in the entryway that you can drop in the collection basket or go to the link within today's online order of service, which you can find at buff.org.
We understand that the folks from the Unitarian Universalist Church of Spokane are here with us today in lieu of a Sunday service in Spokane. And please stay with us after the service. And of course, this goes to all of you who are not from Spokane as well, but on Zoom. Stay for our coffee hour where we break into small groups on Zoom and have little get-to-know-you sessions. And of course, we have coffee and conversation here in person as well, just down the stairs. And hope I will have a chance to talk with you there.
And after our coffee hour at noon, please stay for the presentation by the Buff Board and our treasurer, Sky Hedman, about a proposed kitchen improvement project that all Buff members will be asked to vote on in 2 weeks at the congregational meeting. Sky will also present today the proposed budget for the coming fiscal year, and she'll be taking your questions. Both today's preliminary meeting and the official annual congregational meeting on May 15th will be held both in person and online at the same Zoom address that you're using now. Tomorrow, it being the first Monday of the month, we'll have our evening Taizé service in person and online at 7 p.m. Taizé is a meditative service in candlelight with gentle chants and prayer. There are details and more announcements in your order of service and in our newsletter, the Midweek Update, which you can find at buff.org.
I ran across an old poem recently called "And Then." It's by Judy Chicago, a feminist poet and artist, and begins, "And then all that has divided us will merge. And then compassion will be wedded to power." The poem was written in 1979. I don't suppose that back then she had a date in mind for when this vision of the future might come to be. Some things, of course, have changed since 1979. Some positive, some negative. And some things have changed irreversibly, such that what we may have envisioned for our futures back then are no longer possible. I know that I am not alone in my periodic feelings of deep discouragement around this, and a sense of exhaustion that over and over we have to adjust our goals for the future based on changing conditions in the new present. But today, we also have an opportunity to build on some of the great dreams set forth long ago. And we can pass through many doors that were once closed. So let's consider together what we have to work with now, who we have to work with, and how we might integrate bygone dreams into the present and generate realistic and beautiful aspirations that can guide us and help us to build the courage and resilience that we need now.
My wife, Dominique, and I just got back yesterday from my very first trip to see the redwoods of Oregon and California. And it was a road trip. It was also our first time leaving Whatcom County since the pandemic hit. We were completely overwhelmed, moved, awestruck. Still awestruck by the full expression of the interconnected web of life. We planned the trip very carefully in advance to be the perfect combination of safe, comfortable, and just enough adventure. And yet it pushed our edges with narrow, winding roads, construction, crazy drivers, detours, and with having to witness the horrifying effects of reckless logging and devastating fires. But then we saw the redwoods, trees that had survived hundreds, even thousands of years of changes and challenges. And along the way, because this was an adventure after all, we got some much-needed practice in being an adaptable team, making plans and then casting them aside when the situation called for it. So as we light our chalice this morning, may we kindle our own willingness to prepare, plan, and then adjust or even cast aside our plans if life is asking something else of us. Now, please join me in reciting our covenant, which is printed in your order of service. Love is the spirit of this fellowship, and service gives it life. Celebrating our diversity and joined by a quest for truth, we work for peace and honor all creation. This is our covenant. Now please stand in body and spirit and join us in singing hymn number 83 in your gray hymnals, Winds Be Still.
Winds be still, storm clouds pass and silence come. Peace grace this time with harmony. Fly, bird of hope, and shine, light of love, and in calm let all find tranquility. Bird, fly high, lift our gaze toward distant view, help us to sense life's mystery. Fly high and far and lead us each to see how we move through the winds of eternity. Light shine in, illuminate our inward view, help us to see with clarity. Shine bright and true, so we may join our songs in new sounds that become full symphony. We come together as a community acknowledging that we come with joys and sorrows, memories and hopes, troubles and questions. So from time to time, we take an opportunity to share these with one another. If you have something that you would like to share briefly, one sentence would be best. Come on up to the microphone, and then you will have the opportunity to light a candle or drop a stone in the water as a symbolic way for us to acknowledge this together. Those of you on Zoom, feel free to type into the chat, and we will be sharing those as well and lighting candles.
My name's Yoshi, and this is my gratitude. Thank you, merciful oneness, for the promise of world peace. Thank you.
I'm Ann Stevenson, and I want to thank all of you for contributing to the Afghan resettlement circle that we're expecting any moment to hear of a match with an Afghan family, any day now. Anyway, thank you for incredible support. We got just wonderful donations. Sorry.
I'm Asko Hämäläinen. Hauskaa vappua. Happy May Day. Just 2 days ago, finally found out that my left side is gone with wind. So the cure for that one obviously is a knife taken internally.
My name is Cindy Pfeiffer-Hoyt, and my gratitude is my husband and I traveled on a road trip across the country to visit our daughter and her family, and spent just glorious time with our 2 grandsons who are 8 and 11. So very grateful for that trip.
Hi, I'm Jim. As of February 13th, I am now an orphan.
Oh.
I'm Jan, and I want to express huge gratitude to our care team. Following my hospitalization recently, I think I've had about 15 people come and do things for me, including meal preparation and just little jobs around the house. It's been fabulous. Thank you all.
My name is Hank, and this is a candle of joy. Last night we were finally able to make good on last year's auction, a murder mystery party, and it was so joyous to be gathered with 9 other buffsters and in costume and in character without masks and sharing food and having fun, and it just felt glorious. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Nancy, and as some of you know, my great passion is teaching and playing the music of Zimbabwe. And today, registration opened. It hasn't occurred since 2019, and I'm elated.
Registration for what?
Hi, I'm Michael, and as Paul mentioned about dates and things that have changed and not changed. What I was going to mention is, when I was very young, we first lived in an apartment. The address was 1207 Kelton Avenue. My one set of grandparents, their house in Ford City, Pennsylvania, was 1207. And here, our address is 1207. And in all those places, and especially here, it's very meaningful for me to be not only a Unitarian Universalist, but one in this church. Thank you.
I'm Melanie Reek, and I have so much gratitude for this community, and particularly for the friendship of a group of April birthdays who are women members here, and we've been getting together, and it really made a huge difference during the pandemic.
I'm Kristen Barber, and this last week I became a great-great-aunt, I guess you call it. And the baby had to be airlifted to Seattle because he was oxygen deprived and put for 3 days on ice to cool his brain. And it looks like he is totally, totally good and fine and healthy.
I also have a couple comments or sharings from the Zoom. Kat McIntyre says, as a joy, it's so wonderful to hear Paul singing again. And Sarah Pearson shares, just returned from leading a group of 50 Danish agricultural students on a packed educational itinerary from San Francisco to Las Vegas, and managed to not lose even one of them. And David Curley shares, grateful to be recovering from COVID, a relatively mild case, such a joy to walk around the neighborhood and listen to the birds.
And I'll light one more candle and drop one more stone in the river of life to represent all of the joys and concerns that are too tender within our hearts yet to share, and all of those in the wider world that we may have the courage to embrace them. A headline this week in the Bellingham Herald invited us to consider the possibility of World War III. Some of us have probably taken up the invitation to consider that. Some of us have declined. I'm not going to pretend the possibility of World War III doesn't exist, but it's not my battle. Illiteracy is not my battle. The crime rate is not my battle. Labor unions, even though this is May Day and I celebrate labor unions, my heart is with those brave souls who are out there promoting solidarity. But for now, at least, that's not my battle. I am so grateful that all of you are working to improve lives, including your own, and reforming systems, including those at Buff, in 1,000 different ways, because none of us can effectively focus on more than a few things at once. During my sabbatical, I took the opportunity to go through all of my old papers. It's interesting to see what I gave my attention to at different stages in my life. There were short stories that I wrote as a teenager, and papers I wrote in college that showed that I was gradually accumulating new insights of how I understood myself and society and the natural world. There were "This I Believe" or credo statements that I had written in various UU 101 classes. I found old lists of long-term goals, some of which I had reached and some not, and wedding vows that Jane and I made to one another 30 years ago next month. My views of myself over time and my views of our astonishing, fragile, interdependent web of creation have changed. Because I and this astonishing, fragile, interdependent web of all creation have changed. Life is dynamic, serendipitous, devious, and shocking. The state of our planet, our democracy, our personal health are unpredictable. Not much plays out with a foreseeable cause and effect. Here are a few examples of how my realities and my understandings have changed over time, and how my sense of purpose for my life has changed in correspondence to my realities and understandings. I'm not going to try to extricate between what's a reality and what's an understanding and what's a purpose, and which came first, the chicken or the egg, or the process that led from the chicken to the egg and the process that led from the egg to the chicken. For now, let's say that it doesn't matter which came first. The aspiration, the reality, the changing hopes, all of these things are so interdependent. Anyway, back then. At age 26, I visited a Unitarian Universalist congregation for the first time. The minister, Corin Aristian, probably preached on a wide variety of things over the years, but what I seized upon were the parallels he always talked about between Unitarian Universalist principles and the ideals that underlie democracy. How we might fight, not at the front lines of political wrangling, but I shouldn't necessarily say it in fighting terms, but how we also may struggle in congregational life to be a microcosm of democracy so that we can be a part of touching the world beyond us and showing that healthy, democratically organized and operated organizations can exist, and that crucial conversations about the deeper meaning of democratic principles and processes can continue. If we do this, I believed, we would have a disproportionate impact on keeping democracy alive at every level. Back then, that idea fired me up, and I thought, I would like to be like Corin and help people understand these deep truths. Little did I imagine at the time that American democracy would need more than intellectual reexamination of our history and philosophy. Back then, I read a book called The Wisdom of Crowds, and I was excited by the idea that crowds aren't always just mobs, but under certain conditions, large groups of people attuned to the same problem usually, eventually, arrive at a solution that was better than what any one individual within the group could come up with. I was animated with the goal of creating those conditions for that to happen Little did I imagine at the time that social media would come along and decimate the conditions necessary for societal learning and cooperation. Back then, I believed strongly in the unspoken, I guess we talked about it, but it wasn't one of the explicit principles, but I think one of the key ideas of Unitarian Universalism, that if we listen to people who held different perspectives on an issue, we could learn something from both sides. Little did I imagine at the time white nationalism. That was then. This is now. Since then, Anita Hill, hanging Chads, Abu Ghraib, Hurricane Katrina, smartphones, sexual abuse in the church, the gig economy, my own empty nest, Trayvon Martin, and some other things. If you were to make your own list, you might sort through all of the miracles and catastrophes and find a lot of the big ones haven't made much of a difference in the long run. And you might sort through your personal life and find seemingly mountainous events that turned out to be molehills, and small things that pushed you past the point of no return. So how have your realities, your understandings, and your purposes changed? And perhaps the more important question, what have you found at the intersection of all of these? Just for now, let's call that intersection your mission in life. The place where what you have to offer and what the world needs and what makes you come alive all come together. Your resources, your motivations, your perspectives, your private world and our shared world, they've all changed over time until they became now. So where is your purpose in the midst of all that? I mentioned earlier a poem by Judy Chicago called "And Then." You can find it in a gray hymnal. It's number 464. I invite you to read it with me now. 464. And then all that has divided us will merge. And then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind. And then both men and women will be gentle. And then both women and men will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another's will. And then all will be rich and free and varied. And then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many. And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance. And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old. And then all will nourish the young. And then all will cherish life's creatures. And then all will live in harmony with each other and the earth. And then everywhere will be called Eden once again. As much as I love this vision and the mission that it calls us to, it was written decades ago. Today, because the underlying condition of our lives have changed, the language we use to describe our world, our resources, our relationships, our institutions, our awareness, all of these changing, whether in essence our dreams change or not, in the big picture, we definitely need to put them into new words and re-envision our path to get there. So Melanie is going to play for us some meditative music, and during this time, I invite you first to breathe, to open your heart and clear your mind. Give yourself the time you need. And then, after a minute or two, if your mind drifts back to the question at hand, perhaps a particular phrase will arise in the vein of the poem we just read. If you're with us on Zoom, type that phrase into the chat, and when the music ends, Carrie will read them, and we will create our own and then poem. Depending upon how many there are on Zoom, I may be coming around the sanctuary with a microphone so that you can share as well. Maybe you'll have it up here, maybe better to write it down so that we can be brief and keep moving. What comes to mind for you might be grand in scope, or it might be a detail. I just ask that you keep it a short phrase, and if it first comes to you in a negative form, what you see, something awful that you want to change, see if you can shift it a bit, shift the language a bit to convey what you would change it to. It may not be possible, but I have to admit, when I did this exercise, a lot of the negative came to me, and so I tried to reframe that. So, Melanie.
How can I change now to benefit others? And then hope will arise for all. Acknowledge the pain and fear inside those who appear to be our enemies with all the compassion we can muster. And then we treated each other with kindness.
And then the tree mother will nourish the bear and the sky, and will gladly split her sides and spill her treasure and wisdom for the forests of tomorrow's fish.
And then we will listen to and honor the wisdom of the indigenous people.
And then the children will demand what is right and just and lead us into the future in a way that we cannot.
And then those who had an abundance shared, so all had enough.
And then peace will prevail upon the earth.
And then all children will be treasured and safe and free to play. And then all bodies will be seen and understood as holy.
And then I will see and hear the love that surrounds me.
And then there shall be great research, and cancer will become a thing of the past.
And then fossil fuels will stay in the ground.
And then all of the tools of war were laid to rest forever.
And then the kindness and love that resides in our hearts will rise once more and become manifest.
Go
ahead. And then we will all become part of a beloved community.
And then there shall be no gender, and people will live as the full humans they are. And then we learn to listen with curiosity and no judgment. 4-year-old. And then everyone had as much ice cream as they wanted, but not too much.
And then we can accept that we were flawed in the past and still have hope for the future and know that we will rise to our better natures.
And then everyone will be housed, have a basic income, meaningful work, and universal health care. And then we will strive toward achieving what is in the collective interest of future generations.
And then people will choose peace.
And then the beauty we love within us and around us will be our daily action.
And then all the wealth which is created by labor will belong to the creators thereof.
Ennui and self-hatred then takes flight today on wings of joy.
And then remember, we are related to all flora and fauna, and we will revere them.
And then we will forgive ourselves and everyone.
And then inspiration and hope can return.
thank you. I really found myself getting choked up as you shared that. And then we go on, because this is a work in progress. Work with a capital W, and progress with a capital P. I've spoken a little bit about the world back then. I'd like to share a few things about the world now that might be leading us toward a healthier planet, an egalitarian society, and many joyous little moments. One of my greatest fears that makes it hard for me to envision a positive future, and even makes it hard for me sometimes to enjoy the present, is that climate change operates on a feedback loop, such that the more carbon there is in the atmosphere, that creates conditions under which that accelerate the process, and so forth. But feedback loops can go the other way too. The small improvements that we create don't just accumulate bit by bit. They often lead to tipping points of regeneration. About 10 years ago, my son Rick was a student at tiny McAllister College in St. Paul. It did my heart good to see him and his peers advocating to get a composting program on campus. The administration agreed, and the next year his campus job was to figure out how to make that happen, with all the trash haulers and promoting it and getting people to cooperate in the dorms and the dining hall and the offices and classrooms. But year after year, it became the norm. But things don't usually change that fast. Rick was also part of an environmental group that was lobbying the college administration to divest from fossil fuels. After a few years, he and his cadre graduated. But they passed the ball to those that they had trained and nurtured to carry on that work. And this past fall, McAllister divested from its investments in fossil fuel industries, as did Harvard with its $44 billion endowment. And the movement is spreading. In 2014, there were $52 billion divested from fossil fuels worldwide. That number is now over 40 trillion. More than the annual gross product of the United States and China combined. Which is just spectacular to contemplate, and also causes me to reflect on, okay, so how big is the oil industry? But as this movement grows, investments in renewable energy become more and more attractive and cheaper, and fossil fuels become less and less profitable, leading to more and more divestment. Whether it's to help the environment or for the simple profit motive, I'm glad to see it. And that feedback loop hurtles on despite some obstacles. It is such a bizarre battle. On the one hand, the Rockefeller Foundation, established by the world's greatest oil tycoon, John D. Rockefeller, announced in 2020 that it would fully divest from all fossil fuels and increase investments in a just transition to a renewable energy economy. On the other hand, the state of Texas recently decided to punish financial investment firms, saying the state will not do business with firms that require or even offer funds in the category of socially responsible green investments. At least 7 other states have passed similar laws or policies. And yet, Texas immediately discovered that their plan would not work without major loopholes. So now they've changed their rule so that financial firms can issue green funds as long as the purpose for excluding fossil fuels is financial rather than ethical. I am not kidding. Meanwhile, in Hollywood, a group of screenwriters backed by the Sierra Club and many other environmental and social justice organizations has created a resource called Screenwriting in the Age of Climate Change. These writers are lifting up the reality that stories have a tremendous impact on social psychology and our behaviors. And today, movies and TV are primary sources of the stories that we see and hear and think about. And if we want to have a positive impact on climate change, our stories about that topic can't be preachy and relentlessly depressing or cheesily optimistic or filled with stereotypical climate villains and heroes. It takes skill and attention and the cooperation of teams, not just to create meaningful plots, but important little things like including solar panels and electric vehicles as if they're just a normal part of the background, to show characters behaving in environmentally responsive ways, not to spotlight this, but indicating that this is just what people do. Or at least, the very least, have the effects of climate change playing out in the background of every story because it has to. Not pretending that it's not there. They say that any show that doesn't include aspects of climate change is science fiction. It's not that the writers alone are going to change attitudes, but just like the efforts to reduce smoking over the last 20 or 30 years, which involved local and national laws and incentives, it helped to have Hollywood stop showing smoking in every scene by everybody who was anybody. I point this out because, not because I don't know if there are any Hollywood screenwriters here, but we all tell stories. We all tell stories, and when we do, we shouldn't lie about how we feel or what we see that distresses us about war and racial injustice and the demise of journalism. But when we can, it's worth the effort to tell others and to tell ourselves the true stories with all of their complexity. So I invite you to recommit with me now, to be a part of the story of courage and resilience. Choose to directly experience that transcending mystery and wonder, affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces that create and uphold life. There are stories to jump into wherever we look. We can be a part, we can embody those stories. This coming Tuesday, a beautiful saga called the Totem Pole Journey continues with a blessing here at Buff out in the parking lot with a big truck carrying a huge, beautiful totem pole. It's at 6 o'clock. Please be there for the blessing. We'll be joining in solidarity not only with the Lummi, but an interfaith community that are part of this blessing, supporting this trip, which this one of many trips that have been going on for years, where the carvers take this beautiful, powerful, inspirational symbol from state to state. This time they'll be calling attention to removal of dams from the Snake River in order to restore salmon population and conditions for salmon to thrive, which also will mean, of course, conditions for the orca to survive. I'd like to close with a little meditation. Where in your body do you feel the pains of the world? Where does that ache live in you? In your shoulders? Your gut? Dare for just a moment to pay attention to that part. What is it connected to? A sense of loss, frustration, grief? Is it connected to fears about what comes next for the generations to come? Fears for your parents, or for the birds that no longer land in your neighborhood park? If we can tap into our fears and our grief, acknowledge them when they come, or since they don't always arrive at opportune times, take just a little time out from time to time to know what is real, know who you are, know your limits and your powers as well, and slowly work your way toward the story that you want to tell. Amen. Each week we take a collection to support Buff and or other organizations in the area that do good work to support our principles. Today, as the ushers come around, I invite you to be as generous as you can to support our good work. If you're on Zoom, I believe there are links and explanations in the chat box about how to proceed. Back then, before we even knew the words, we were toddling around singing something. And then, even if we no longer have a voice, just with a little sway of the head, we will be singing. So now I invite you to join with me in number 108, How Can I Keep from Singing? My life flows on in endless songs, same thing. My life flows on in endless song, real lover's lamentation. I hear the real, no far off hymn that builds a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? But though the tempest round me roars, I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon pile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? As Carrie extinguishes the chalice, I share a Franciscan blessing adapted. May God bless us with discomfort at easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships, so that we will live deeply and from the heart. May God bless us with anger at injustice, oppression, and exploitation, so that we will work for justice, freedom, and peace. May God bless us with tears to shed for those who mourn, so that we will reach out to be present to them in their distress. And may God bless us with just enough foolishness to believe that we can make a difference in this world, so that we will do those things that so many say cannot be done. Amen. And let's circle around for freedom.